podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan, and a very rare interview indeed with British Speedway's most decorated manager of all time, a title winner with 3 different top flight clubs. He's also helped 5 riders win a total of 11 world championships. He is Peter Adams.
And there was a coach there full of Cradley supporters. They were having a toilet break. And I thought, my God, if ever any of these see me and recognise me, they're going to be all around the car. Bloody Bruce is hiding in the boot. And I pulled up at the window and he said, anything to declare?
Peter's story is fascinating. He started out as the personal manager with Ole Olsen and then ended up getting himself into management, and he took the Coventry Bees and Cradley Heathens to back-to-back league titles before moving on to Wolves, where he's most synonymous with through the course of his career. He's also mentored individual riders to world title glory, and he's been a roadie for the rock band Queen. Just a few of his achievements. Welcome along to this episode. You're in for a treat. We barely touch the sides because there's so much to go through over his 40-year career, but I hope you enjoy the conversations and the stories that we do bring you in this. We decided to do this episode slightly differently. Usually when we record these podcasts, they're done remotely, a little bit like on Zoom. But we decided to do it a bit more old school. We met up in person. We went for a coffee. So I thought, we'll just record that. And we went off to a branch of Starbucks, stuck some microphones on the table, and that's what you're going to hear. So I hope you enjoy the stories. Apologies if there's an occasional sound of somebody having a coffee made in the background, but please sit back and enjoy. Peter Adams, thanks for joining us. We're in a Starbucks. We are literally having a coffee together. I often say to people that when we have these conversations, it is just like having a chat and a coffee. But it's great to meet you in person to talk about your career and...
Other coffee houses are available.
Let's start by talking about the last year before we talk about everything else, because you've got so many amazing stories, I know. But this time last year, you weren't to know where you would be ending up with Wolves. It came a bit of a bombshell to everybody. And now, you're staring at 2024 and you're not in a position where you're building a team and looking at managing a team for the first time in, well, I was going to say 40 years, isn't it? So very unusual for you, but first of all, reflecting on that news when it came, and now, obviously, you're able to look back on it that, Wolves has paused for the moment.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it's a very unusual situation, that we find ourselves in. Normally this time of the year, we're full throttle, arranging our team and the like, so... to be standing on the sidelines watching everybody else do that is a bit of a surreal experience for us. As you say, it came as a complete, completely unexpected bolt out of the blue, and it's been very depressing ever since. We haven't managed yet to find an alternative site that we can definitely get stuck into. But although the Speedway is dead, we're not exactly buried yet, and things are, happening in the background, but there's nothing concrete to report.
Yeah, well, that obviously is the next question, isn't it? That these discussions, obviously, it takes a long time, doesn't it, to get anything, but that work is still going on then with yourself and CVS and everybody else associated with Wolves.
Yeah, Wolverhampton Council have been, quite supportive. And although they've drawn a complete blank in finding, parcels of land within the Wolverhampton conurbation, there are other surrounding councils, who might be in a position to help. And I know that Wolverhampton Council are talking to neighbouring councils about, whether they might be able to provide a solution for us. But those are sort of early days, I suppose, at the minute. But we've got nothing concrete to hang our hats on at the minute.
The hope was to bring Speedway back for next year, for 2025. Do you still remain hopeful of that then in that case, or might we be looking at a longer term situation now?
I think you might be, because it takes a long time, to build a speedway facility from scratch. And the time is ticking, 6 weeks are we away from the start of this season, which means we're 60 weeks away from the next one. So, we've got to get our skates on, if we're going to come to the party anytime soon.
In a way, though, you've got family involvement now with Chris, who's going to be with Sam Ermolenko, and we're going to talk more about Sam, I'm sure, in this conversation. But there are parallels with yourselves there, I think, in that, we'll cover this more, but he having the support of an experienced rider like that, making his way into team management, it is a story that might be familiar with you. Yeah,
Chris is a fantastic mechanic, first and foremost. He's helped so many of, the world's best riders for so long. So it's a natural progression for him, I suppose, to follow me into team management if he can. So the Birmingham thing is going to be a good experience for him. I'm sure he'll have plenty to offer in that regard. And hopefully, he can make a long career out of team management, because he's certainly got all the credentials for that.
On the subject of clubs making a comeback, of course, we sit here, it's actually the day after this appeal over Coventry has been thrown out. We'll talk about your Coventry career, but you've got connections there, obviously, and fantastic news that this has been sort of thrown out now, and the importance of the Brandon Stadium has been recognised.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a soft spot for Coventry, obviously, because that's where my team management career started in 1978 under, the tutorship of Charles Ochiltree, who was, the best speedway administrator this country's ever seen and perhaps ever will see. So yeah, it's fantastic news, as you say, emanating from yesterday. Quite, where everybody goes from here, I'm not sure, because I haven't been following that story closely. But I'm close enough to know that it's fantastic news and a great feather in the cap of Jeff, who's done so much sterling work on their behalf, for a long time now. It's been closed for many years, but it looks like a pathway may be developing there for the return of motorsport to that stadium, and if it does, then that's going to be absolutely wonderful news for Midland Speedway in particular, but World Speedway in general, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great names of Speedway, and we'll talk more about them very soon. But let's talk about your background then, because I think often when I speak to anybody on this podcast, I think pretty much everybody, bar one or two, have said that when I ask them how they got into Speedway, usually it's a family member that's taken them along. It's the parents or a brother or a friend who's taken them to the Speedway for the first time. But for you, it was, I think I'm right in saying that you were keen to drag your dad along, and maybe he wasn't so enthusiastic, but you were.
Yeah, a few of my friends at school were attending this Speedway thing at Wolverhampton on a Friday night, and I hadn't got a clue what it was. But I badgered my dad into taking me one day. We were late getting there, I remember, because the meeting was halfway through, and by the time we got in there, my dad didn't have a car, so we were on the bus. And I well remember that very first night I was there. We stood on the, what is the fourth bend now. There was a very big crowd. I could hardly see any other track, so many people there. And the meeting, the match part of the proceedings finished. And then they went into this second half. And some of the better riders were coming from the handicap. It was a bit like a forerunner to the Olympique. But I remember we got to catch the last bus home. So we never saw the conclusion of the meeting because we had to, we got there late and had to leave early. But I was absolutely enthralled by, the bits that we did see. And then, as I say, because some of my mates were regulars there, subsequently I started going with them. And we used to stand on the second bend. And my most vivid memory of those nights was they used to play Frank Highfield's I Remember You about 30 times during the meeting. I think it's the only record they had. And these are the days of Tommy Sweetman, James Bond, Dave Eames, people like this, who the older watchers, will recall those names.
And so from there on, Speedway got you. You sort of intoxicated by it, and you became a regular fan. And where did your Speedway go there? Did you ever fancy being a rider?
It'd be silly. I watched for a few seasons, I think, from memory. But then I got a place at university, and time didn't permit me to go to the Speedway. So for many years, I never went at all. But from where we lived in a place called Sedgley, in between Wolverhampton and Cradley, on a Friday night, we could hear the bikes in the background. And we have the local newspaper here, the Express and Star. We used to have it delivered to Mum and Dad's house. And I remember reading that Wolverhampton was a bit in uproar because they'd sacked this Swedish rider called Hasse Holmqvist in favour of a new up-and-coming Danish rider called Ole Olsen. And I kept reading in the newspaper that this guy was, the real deal. So this one Friday night, I was at a loose end and I thought, I'm going to pop down there and have a look what all the fuss is about this Danish guy. So I went, and Ollie was head and shoulders above everybody else, reeled off a maximum like he got the cigar out, by the end of the second lap. And me and my wife then became regulars again every Friday. And after every meeting on a Friday night, there's a famous Chinese restaurant in Wolverhampton called the Good Sea. It's not there anymore, but it certainly was in those days. And after every meeting, me and my wife used to go there. Well, girlfriend as she was at the time. And this one Friday night, we turned up as normal, but there'd been a function on in Wolverhampton that evening, and the restaurant was absolutely packed. And we asked if they got a table for two, and they said that they didn't, but there was a table for four. And we could certainly have that table, but if another couple came in, would they mind, if they shared the table with us? And we said, no, that's no problem. So we sat down, and after about 20 minutes, Ollie and his wife, Ulla, came in. So they had to sit with us. And that's how I met him. I was a practicing civil engineer at the time. And Ollie lived in Holmes Chapel in Cheshire. And he was telling me that he wanted a big extension built on his house, but he didn't know what the procedure was or how to get started. So, I ended up designing the project for him and managing it. And that's how we got together. It's all fate, everything in life is fate. I've always thought that. Maybe we wouldn't have gone that night, and maybe he wouldn't have come in, and if he had done, maybe there'd have been more than those two seats available. But I've always thought in life, that everything's about fate. As you say, that was the start of a very long career.
I think there's that moment, isn't it? You go from being a fan and now you're involved in the sport, and you see sort of behind the curtain of Speedway a little bit, and you can never go back to just being a fan anymore, and
no.
You're going to look at it in a completely different way forever, aren't you?
Yeah, I can't, myself, when I go to watch Speedway and I'm not involved in the meeting, I don't enjoy it at all, People might find that a very funny thing to say, but when you've been involved on the inside of Speedway, it's very difficult, you know, to step back and watch it all from the sidelines, which is what makes the Wolverhampton situation all the more difficult for me.
And well, with that in mind, will you be going anywhere this year to watch? You know, you said it's a very difficult thing for you to do.
Yeah, I've got great friendships, obviously, with a lot of the lads who represented Wolverhampton. So, you know, they know that I'll be there for advice for them, you know, if they need it. And I'm sure I'll be rocking up at one or two places, you know, just to keep my eye on what they're doing.
So this connection that you made then with Ole Olsen, who you'd gone out to watch riding, and he ended up having a Chinese with him in the end, and then he hears about your skills. You know, you're a civil engineer, and he was, as you say, getting his house done. But it went further than that, didn't it? Because you ended up further down the line helping design Vojens.
I did, yeah. You know, every time people walk into that stadium, what they see is down to me. But that's not the only stadium we were involved in. We were involved in Bremen and Landshut. I think there's a GP there this year.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, we relayed the Landshut track for them many moons ago. And then, you know, I had the bright idea of developing the Master of Speedway competition, which is a forerunner to the GPs. So we ran that for 2 or 3 years together. We did so many things. It's, you know, I can't remember them all, obviously, off the top of my head. But one of the most influential things that happened in that period there was that Ollie got a place on the track racing commission of the FIM as a rider's representative. So the FIM bigwigs were very keen to listen to him about what his ideas were for, you know, the development of the sport, and particularly for on the rules side of things. And although Ollie had some ideas, I have to say I had a few more than him. So I would, you know, load the gun with the bullets, and he, around the FIM table, he would fire them. And there were so many rules that we got changed. The most significant of which I well recall was the tape touching rule. Because if you look at old videos of the start of races, it's infuriating, you know, the way that riders are on the tape and off the tape and on the tape and off the tape. And it took half an hour, you know, to get a bloody race started. So one day we were driving down the motorway and I said to Ollie, you know what, Ollie? We should have a new rule that if you touch the tapes, you're excluded. What a bloody good idea, he said, you know. So the next FIM meeting, he put this on the table. That was approved, and then Britain followed and all the other countries followed. And, you know, lots and lots and lots of the rule book, which perhaps shouldn't be telling you this, lots of people are scathing about. I'm sad to say, you know, they're down to me.
That's why you never complain about it.
That's right. The BSPA in the early 80s, they had a rules committee, and I was chairman of the rules committee. And I've often, you know, thought that they should perhaps, you know, reconvene that. Some of the sport's brightest brains ought to be in a room on their own, you know, talking about the rules and what's good or bad for Speedway.
And you worked with Ollie full time in the end. You know, you gave up your job and he employed you, and you were sort of based at his house a few days a week.
What happened there was I was a practicing civil engineer with a firm called Tarmac Construction here in Wolverhampton. And one day, the boss called me into his office and said that they were going to split the civil engineering design team up. And because I wasn't married, I was going to be very easy to move to another location. And the choice was I could go to Edinburgh or Abu Dhabi I had to look on the map, you know, where that
yeah,
was.
all fairly local.
Yeah. Or Winchester in Hampshire. So I didn't particularly want to go to Edinburgh or Abu Dhabi, so I ended up being moved to Winchester. And they gave me a great deal to move. I even got a company car, an Austin Allegro 1100.
Look at you.
With the hydroelastic suspension. I don't know whether you've ever been in a car with that, but it makes you feel sick.
I think my dad might have had I think the first car that we ever had, well, that I remember, I think it was an Allegro, yeah.
Yeah, so
Wonderful machine.
I got one of them, and that enabled me to sell the car I did have, which formed the deposit for my first house in a place called Chandler's Ford, just north of Southampton. And the problem with all of this, though, was that Ollie and I were getting more and more bolted together. I was living down there, he was up in Cheshire, and we had to see one another 2 or 3 days a week. And it was just getting too much, you know. So I said to Ollie, look, Ollie, if we're going to, you know, continue with this relationship of ours, then you're going to have to employ me, you know, full time. So he agreed, you know. So I knocked the civil engineering on the head, and then Ollie and I were together full time.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and my guest in this episode is Peter Adams, an all-round Speedway legend. Wolves and Cradley still ahead of him in his career, and in the next parts we'll hear about moving into management and taking Coventry to back-to-back league titles. Welcome back to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan. Don't forget to check out our previous episodes, most recently with Hans Nielsen. Also, Brady Kurtz, Craig Ackroyd and Ben Cook are recent guests. There's plenty more to choose from. Just search Humans of Speedway on any podcast app. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the future episodes coming soon as well. In this one, we're chatting to an absolute legend, Peter Adams, team manager of the Wolverhampton Wolves for many, many years. He's also managed Cradley to glory and the Coventry Bees. And in this next section, we discuss moving into management and winning a title at your very first attempt.
Yeah, Coventry, with Ollie, you know, spearheading the team, they got real prospects of winning things. And they had a good team in Ollie's first season there. 77 was even better. But they didn't win anything and never looked like winning anything. And I think Charles Ochiltree got the vibes that a new team manager, you know, might be necessary. So Charles Ochiltree bit the bullet. He sacked the previous team manager, and he gave me the job. And we won the league that first year and the next year. Finished third, I think, in the year after that. But that was a good start, obviously, to my career.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better, really, does it? Back-to-back league titles. I'm not sure there's any... I mean, you've won the league title at 3 clubs, which I think is still a record. And I don't think there are too many managers that have won a league title in their first season.
No, I've got 9 of them altogether. 2 at Coventry, my first 2 years at Cradley, and then 5 at Wolverhampton. But I've been runner-up 6 times as well. So, 15 times in the top 2 in a 30-odd year career ain't bad.
It's not. What's the secret of a winning team? Is it the dynamic of the right?
Too long. You ain't got enough tape. For that. It takes a lot of things.
But I think though that sometimes fans will look at the averages and they go, what's the best we can get, the best bang for your buck. But I think it's about the personalities as well, isn't it?
It's about a lot of things, as I say. You've got to have quality enough within, the riding stock, obviously, to do the job. In behind that comes, a lot of things. Which, we could do a podcast about, team management credentials, all on its own.
I think we should definitely do that. It'd be interesting.
Whatever.
So 77, 78 and then 79. But 79 ended against Hull, didn't it? And that was there was classic Olsson major rivalry and that decider as well, wasn't there? So there's that too.
I remember that day as if it were yesterday. Because Coventry, as I say, had got a very good team. And the whole team was nowhere near as good. But they did tremendously well and they pushed us really hard on that night, I remember. And that taught me a big lesson, that meeting, which I've never ever forgotten. And that is that if you give a meeting like that 1,000%, of what you've got and leave absolutely nothing out there on the track whatsoever, then you will be in the running, no matter how strong the opposition is. There's no way, that Hull should have got anywhere close to us. We should have, if you look at, rider for rider, we should have steamrolled them in the final. But it was a close affair, not decided until very near the end. And that's because Hull were trying. They were giving absolutely everything for the cause. And although that's not a secret, it's something that is often overlooked and not delivered, by teams who don't think they can win. And it's the team manager's job, or one of his jobs, is to get them in that mindset, before the tapes go up on the first tee.
I know that chatting to your son Chris, he mentioned that when it gets to the business end of seasons, you used to get and maybe still did, but get the riders together at your house beforehand, have a bit of a team talk. And the one he actually quotes is the one where I think Ronnie Corrie was running late, and he phoned your house, but Sam Ermolenko answered the phone, and I think the rest of the team took it in turns.
Oh no, that's. I know what he's talking about. He's a bit mixed up there. That was over the years. I've had maybe 20 riders living with us, and this particular occasion you're talking about, Peter Carlson was staying with me, and Ronnie. Everybody loves Ronnie to bits, but he ain't the sharpest tool in the box. And this one day, it was about tea time, and me and PK, we decided we'd have a bit of fun with Ronnie. So I rang him up, and as soon as he picked the phone up, I put the phone down, so I didn't speak, but Ronnie could see that it was me calling him. So a couple of minutes later, he called back, and I picked the phone up, and he says, "What do you want?" I says, "Sam Ermolenko wants to speak to you." I said, "Do you mind ringing him up?" He says, "Yeah, I'll do that. What do you want?" I said, "I don't know. Just ring him, and find out." So then, of course, before Ronnie had got a chance to ring Sam, I got PK to ring him. And he says, "Ronnie, Pete Adams is trying to get hold of you. Will you call him back?" And Sam was in the room at the same time, So Ronnie called me. This is all on the same number, but different people are answering. And Ronnie's getting really bloody fed up with this in the end. "God, what's wrong with my phone, man?" He said, "I keep dialing Sam, I get PK. I'm dialing PK, I get Pete." It was funny, you had to be there. It was a really funny story.
Going back then to this era we're talking about, because you did your 3 years at Coventry, but then, I don't know, was it a brave decision then to go to Cradley? Because there's obviously big rivalry there at that time, but I think, I don't know, well, tell us about that, because I think not every fan at Cradley was maybe overly happy about that to begin with.
No, to say the least. But it was obvious that Ollie was coming to the end of his career. And because I was employed full-time by him. We both had the same thoughts, I'm sure, of what was going to happen, when Ollie finished, what was going to happen to me. And at the same time, I wanted a bit more than just team management. I wanted to be a promoter. And what Cradley I got to learn were about to finish with Dan McCorn. And it seemed to me that there was an opening there, for me. So I talked to Ollie about this, what would he think if I sort of, knocked it on the head at Coventry and moved to Cradley as a promoter and team manager. And I told him I'd made an appointment with Derek Pugh, who owned Cradley at Speedway, to go and have a chat with him. And Ollie was really supportive, because it got him off the hook as well a little bit. And he drove me to Shrewsbury, where Derek Pugh was living, and waited in the car while I went into the house for the interview. And Derek offered me the job on that day, and I came out of that meeting and had to tell Ollie that this was going to be the end of our relationship because I was moving on. But as I say, he was very supportive, and we tried to keep that secret. This must have been in about July or August time, so I knew by then, what my future held. I had to tell Charles Ochiltree, obviously. So he knew and Ollie knew, but those were the only people that did. But when the news eventually leaked out, it didn't go down well, with the Coventry supporters who obviously wanted to retain me, I suppose. But I just needed, to have more strings to the bow, if you like. And I made the move.
And that period was successful.
Two more league titles.
Yeah, and 1981, of course, was the year that Bruce Pennell won the world title at Wembley, one of the world finals everybody raves about. I remember I used to speak to Nigel Pearson. He would say, if everybody goes about Wembley, there's only 2 good races in it. But it depends how you look at it. But he was the world champion. He was in your team. And a real star as well, star quality, but the talent to back it up as well.
Yeah, he was a great lad, Bruce, a great rider, of course. But
did you have to organise a helicopter for him once?
That was after his '81 World Final win at Wembley. We were racing at home, our next match. And in the sort of Monmouth Green's the same. In fact, so many Speedway stadiums are the same. In that that you can't introduce anybody as a sort of surprise appearance. They can't come from behind a curtain or up a trapdoor or whatever. So I was thinking about how I might, get Bruce into the stadium as a real sort of surprise. And I had this bright idea that I would fly him in by helicopter. But as soon as I started making inquiries about that, I realised I'd perhaps bit off a bit more than I can chew, because the rules about where helicopters can land are very strict. But in the end, somebody put me in touch with this guy in, I think he was in Stratford-on-Avon or Warwick or something like that. And I rang him up and told him what I wanted him to do. Was to pick Bruce up from this house where I was living, fly into Cradley and land on the centre green. Yeah, he says, no problem, I can do that. I said, but the timing's got to be absolutely, spot on. You've got to be landing on that centre green at exactly 7:30. But nothing seemed to be a problem for this bloke. And I said to him, I understand you can't land within 500 metres of more than 500 people. How are you going to overcome that? He says, well, I've got a bloody helicopter to pay for. I'll land on the terraces if you want me to. He says, as long as I can just shoot straight off and you never tell anybody, you know, who I am and where I'm from. So I said, all right, then we'll do that. I said, but how are you going to find my house? He said, have you got a big lawn? I says, yeah, we have got a big lawn. He says, we'll get a few rolls of toilet paper and make a big H on the lawn. He says, and you make sure that this Bruce, what you say his name is, Penhall, make sure he's waiting there to jump in. So that's what we had to do. And I remember I was at the house in the car, people are filing into the stadium. I'm like 5 miles away, making this big toilet paper bloody H. I got everything crossed because if he hadn't turned up, this would have been the biggest anticlimax of all time. And then I start hearing this noise in the distance. And sure enough, this helicopter appears over the hill. And he landed, and Bruce had already got his Kevlars on and everything, and he jumped in. And then I shot back to the stadium, and I was there before the helicopter arrived, and it just all went like clockwork. But the other good thing about that night I well remember was I'd spent all that week on the telephone talking to Ronald Reagan's secretary because I wanted to get something really special for Bruce to acknowledge his win. And I managed to talk Ronald Reagan into sending him a telegram congratulating him on his fantastic win at Wembley. And on that parade, after he got out of the helicopter, I presented him with that telegram, which is his prized possession, I would think. We ended up falling out. I mean, we've made our, peace since, but yeah, I know I had a great, as you say, 1981 was a fabulous year. We won the league, he won the world title. And then in 1982, he wanted a lot more money, to ride for Cradley again. And I was the promoter doing the negotiating with him. And this was all by telephone, while I'm in Cradley, he's in Los Angeles. But eventually he turned up for showdown sort of talks, and he got a manager guy with him in tow. And as soon as I saw him, an American guy, I knew there was trouble ahead. In the end, I told Bruce we couldn't match his terms, and we started the season without him, if I remember right. And after 3 or 4 meetings, he realised that I weren't going to budge. We'd have gone all through the season, using the facility for him if necessary.
I don't believe in sort of holding a gun to anybody's head like the promoters or any of the supporters either. I feel like it's important for me to finish out these 2 legs, and if we can't come to terms, then I'm going to have to think and maybe do something else. And I hope it doesn't come to that, because Cradley's really the only team I want to ride for. But if we can't agree terms, we can't agree terms.
How far apart are you?
I wouldn't like to say any figures right at this time, Gary, but we're pretty ways off. If it was anywhere near close, I would say let's go for it. But we both have our disagreements, and hopefully they can be sorted out before Saturday's match at Cradley.
So a disagreement on Thursday evening, a doubt about Pennell's future at Cradley. But negotiations continued yesterday and until the early hours of this morning, when a decision was satisfactorily reached. A contract was drawn between these two, between the world champion Bruce Pennell, captain of Cradley, and the league champions. Very satisfactory indeed. And the news came to us this morning, as a matter of fact, from Bruce himself. And I gather the fee is something like £30,000, which would make Bruce the richest ever Speedway rider in a season in this country.
So in the end, he backed down and he joined. And we got halfway through the season. We were slaughtering everybody. And then out of the blue, he told me he was leaving to pursue this acting career that had been brokered by this manager guy that he got, up his sleeve.
Now, at the beginning of the week, it was confirmed that Bruce Pennell was to embark upon a television career. He talked about it to Gary Newborn on Monday. Gary asked him, as a holder of 3 world titles, why was he leaving Speedway for Hollywood?
Well, I've got a great opportunity that wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Speedway. Speedway's been great to me, and after winning the World Championship, it's brought the great opportunities from the movie industry, and Hollywood won't wait. and I've got a great part here that I could start my new career in the filming industry, and I want to get involved with it, but I won't be quitting totally with Speedway. I hope to come back and still ride at Cradley, maybe next year in open meetings or something like that, if they'll have me back.
How good are you going to be at things like chips and that? You're a great Speedway rider. What sort of actor are you?
I'm not an actor at all, Gary. I haven't had any experience whatsoever.
So he left, and that took a lot of getting over, because that was a savage blow to us, and robbed us of the league title, I think, in the end. As I say, it was a big fallout. We nearly ended up taking him to court for breach of contract. And there was an impasse between us, which was a great shame because we'd grown so close together. But the world final was approaching in Norden. Bruce rang me up one day and said, it's ridiculous, that we've parted like this. Couldn't we get together and try and, patch things up? And I said, well, what are you suggesting? He said, well, are you going to Norden, to the world final? And I said, well, I haven't planned on going. He said, well, I've got to go because I've got the trophy. He says, and they want it back, obviously, for that day. He says, no, I've made no plans. Why don't we go together? So I said, all right, I'll take you there and you bring the trophy, So I organised the ferry tickets. We decided we'd drive. And I had this old Opel Manta at the time. And Bruce turned up at my house, same house where we had to have the toilet roll helicopter. And off we set. And we're on our way to Harwich. We're on the Harwich to Zeebrugge ferry. And we were flying down the motorway, and he suddenly says, hang on, Pete, just pull up at these services because I just need to look in my bag. So I pulled into the services, and he went round to the boot and was looking in his bag. And he said, oh, we've got a problem here. I said, what's that then, Bruce? He says, well, I ain't got my passport. He said, it's in my other bag, we left at the house. But we're like 150 miles from home by this time. So we ain't got time to go back, and we've absolutely, one way or another, we've got to be at that meeting, which is the next day. So there was only one thing for it, and that was to try and smuggle him, because he's presenting the trophy as well, somehow, to each border crossing. So when we were about a mile from Harwich docks, I pulled up and Bruce jumped in the boot with the trophy. And I just drove on the ferry, showed him my ticket. And, before a ferry sails, they want everybody up on the decks, you can't stay on the car level. So I had to leave him in the car, but once the ship had sailed, I went down and let him out. So he'd been in there half an hour by now. And then we got off the ferry exactly the same way, everybody's getting in the cars. I opened the boot, Bruce jumped in there, shook the bloody boot lid, drove off the ferry, waggled my passport at him, no problem, and off we went. But the hairiest bit was when we came up to the border between Belgium and Germany. And it's a country road. I can see that now. I'm looking out the car window, and in the distance I can see these great big floodlights. So we're obviously coming to the border now. And if anything was going to go wrong, it was going to be here. So about a mile from the crossing, I pulled over and he jumped back in the boot. And I pulled up to this little bloke in this kiosk. And there was a coach there full of Cradley supporters. They were having a toilet break. And I thought, my God, if ever any of these see me and recognise me, they're going to be all around the car. Bloody Bruce is hiding in the boot. And we're in this queue coming up to this kiosk where they want to see your passports. And I pulled up at the window. I'll never, ever forget this. And this German guy leant out of the window and he was strumming his fingers on the roof of my car. And he said, anything to declare? And I thought, my God, you know.
Just Bruce Pennell.
They know. I said, no, nothing to declare. He said, right, thank you, he says. And I drove off. You know. My God, I was bloody shitting myself.
What would have happened if it had said,
Well,
open the boot?
it would have been straight to jail, you know. Absolutely, without a doubt. So Bruce had to stay after Norden for a few days while he arranged a temporary passport, you know, to get back home. So, yeah, we've done some bloody stupid things, but that was one of the stupidest for sure. I wouldn't do that again.
Well, hopefully you won't have to. Here's another true or false story. True or false, you were at one point a roadie in some form or another for Queen.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, that must have been 88.
I mean, they were famous then. They were pretty big.
Yeah, this is after Wembley and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
But in 88, they did a whistle-stop tour of 9 provincial venues where only a few people would, I say a few hundred people rather than Nebworth's 200,000, you know, that kind of thing. And I've been to Poole with somebody who knew Greg Lake, Emerson Lake and Palmer.
Yeah. Which is a staple of many Speedway stadiums.
Yeah.
Fanfare for a common man.
Yeah, but I went to school with Carl Palmer,
Wow, okay.
the drummer. And we've been to Poole, and Greg Lake has a house in the New Forest, and he was having a party. And this ex-workmate of mine, who I'd met at Poole Stadium, he got an invitation to this party. So I went with him. And at that party was Roger Taylor, Queen's drummer. So I met him, and we got on, you know, really well. I've still got his phone numbers, you know, to this day. But the following year, well, I was telling him that I was more or less out of work at that time. And he said, well, if anything comes up, you know, we've exchanged our phone numbers and I'll let you know. Anyway, long story short, I ended up putting his drums together for him on those 9 venues, which was great. But another acquaintance of mine is, you know, Electric Light Orchestra.
Yeah.
Bev Bevan, their drummer. He's a big Speedway fan. And he used to come to Monmaggreen when Ollie was riding there on a Friday night. Bev would be there with his wife, and when Wolverhampton Speedway got into financial difficulties, I actually rang Bev up and asked him if he would care to invest in Wolverhampton Speedway, but he didn't want to at the time, you know, so that was the end of that. But yeah, Bev and Roger Taylor, Palmer, all drummers. And all mates of mine, you know, so, yeah.
Must have been a rock and roll showbiz.
Yeah.
So, the thing with Bruce happened and he went off and starred in Chips. Obviously a big loss, but then in 83, we look back now on that being one of, if not the greatest club team that British Speedway certainly has ever seen. It's certainly, you know, there's certainly a debate for it, isn't there? And how do you're losing a rider like Bruce Pennell is a big loss, but how did you approach that then in replacing him and your methods?
I just brought Simon Wiggin.
Well, indeed.
And Eric and I, we ran a training school at Cradley in the winter. The winter of 82, 83, it must have been. And we watched it. It was only for Danish youngsters. There were a few good riders amongst them, obviously. And we were coming to the end of it was a 3-day school. And Eric said to me, well, what do you think? You know, because we can fit one of these in, but who do you reckon's the best? And I said, I think that guy there, you know, I think he's the best. And Eric says, do you? He said, well, I don't. He said, I see a better one than him. So I said, who's that then? And he said, you see that little guy there, you know, no taller than the bike? He said, he's the best, and we should have him. And that was Jano Pedersen. So that's how Jano got to Cradley, another world champion. But him and Simon Wigg and, you know, people like Peter Rawn and, you know, at reserve and stuff like this. I mean, that was an absolute sledgehammer team. I think I only got beat perhaps once or twice all season. But that was another league title, you know. So 2 out of 3 years at Coventry and now 2 out of 3 years at Cradley. But things are moving on because, you know, without being boastful, this winning lark was getting too easy, you know. And once you've got the framework of a team like that, it's very easy each winter, you know, to take one out and put somebody a bit lesser in to get under that point limit. But the whole fabric of the team is still in position. And once you polish up these new guys and indoctrinate them into, you know, the way we work, then it's very easy, you know, to stay in the running all the time. But I wanted more of a challenge than that. And, you know, Wolverhampton was shut and had been shut for a couple of years after the previous promotion. And I had the bright idea of reopening that. And I very, very nearly took Eric Gunderson with me. I mean, wouldn't that have been a coup?
Yeah.
But he got cold feet, you know, at the end and stayed where he was.
So Eric, just to touch on Eric, while you mention him, obviously he was a key part of that '83 side. Of course, he was duelling with Hans Nielsen for the world title, and you know, often he was more successful than Hans in those early days. So again, you've got another world champion on your hands there, and he, you know, a tremendous rider. And I was going to ask, really, you know, and you touch on it, but you know, are there riders that got away from you? You've worked with, frankly, you know, an impressive list of some of the greatest riders of all time through your career in your teams. Are there any that nearly made it in a team and you lost out for whatever reason, or they couldn't be convinced, or?
I suppose looking back, you know, I regret not working with someone like Jason Crump. I think he and I might have, you know, produced a bit of a formidable partnership. I think I regret not working with someone like Chris Harris, you know, in his earlier days. Yeah, there's perhaps 3 or 4 I could probably think of, you know, that I would like to have worked with but never had the chance.
Because as well, it's not just working with these riders in a team perspective, because you've worked with other riders, obviously they've been in your team, the likes of Ty Woffinden, obviously Sam Ermolenko, you know, these riders that have gone on to be world champions, and you've sort of mentored them, and you've been a figure in the pits, like, let's say, Ty, you know, you've been alongside him.
I know the figures, you know, I've mentored 5 different riders to 11 titles, as well as all the league stuff. So there must be something about me, but I don't know. No.
What sort of support do you feel you bring to the riders then when they're in that? Because it's a different environment, isn't it? If you're going into a Grand Prix, completely different level of speedway because of the competition, but also the sense of the occasion can be overawing for some. You know, you just need a couple of dodgy heats, and as you say, that mental strength perhaps is something that riders need. So how do you help riders out when it comes to individual stuff?
At the meeting itself, it's a matter of being able to talk a rider, you know, through the event. because, as you say, it's it's very easy, for them to drop by the wayside, and if they do, then things can snowball, in a bad way. But rather like you were asking me half an hour ago about what makes, a good team manager. Equally, what makes a good mentor, on the individual stage. That's another thing where we would need one of these, separately for me to sort of outline it all. My record is something I'm immensely proud of, and it hasn't happened by accident, You don't win all these things by accident. There are, lots of components, lots of pieces of the jigsaw. And if it's 1,000-piece jigsaw, but you've only got 999 pieces, you ain't going to win. You've got to know what they all are and where they all are, put them all together at the right time.
In respect of Eric, obviously we'll come to Wolves in a sec, but you moved on, but you remain great friends with these riders, just because you're not managing them anymore. So I'm thinking, obviously, it's a conversation I had with Hans Nielsen not long ago, in fact, and we were talking about what happened to Eric, and he was saying how it devastated not everyone around, really, and obviously Hans was riding in the Danish team that day with Eric, and just you obviously being a great friend of his, and I guess as well too when Sama Malenko's had big accidents, and when riders, the reality of the downside of Speedway comes home, it can be tough on you personally as well.
Yeah, there's been quite a few crashes over the years, that have had a big adverse sort of influence on me. As you say, nobody likes to see anybody getting hurt, but when they're your best mates, then it's harder to take, obviously. And when accidents of the magnitude of Eric's come along, life-changing injuries, it's even harder to cope with. But we all know, that the sport's dangerous, and these things have happened, and they're going to happen again in the future, to somebody who's unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Peter Adams, the guest on this episode of Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and in the next part, we'll move on to Wolves, and also how he managed to convince a certain Ty Woffinden to sign for the Wolves, and also take him on to world glory. All in the next part of Humans of Speedway. Welcome back to Humans of Speedway. We're chatting with Peter Adams, who, of course, most know as the team manager of the Wolverhampton Wolves. He's been there for decades. Initially, though, when he moved to Wolves, it was as a promoter. Wolves at the time were in a fairly turbulent position. They had owners who were giving up on the club halfway through a season. They were missing seasons out, and Peter saw an opportunity to bring some much-needed stability to the side. But that also involved him putting his own money into a club for the first time, rather than having the backing of other people. And he found it could be an expensive business. Here's Pete picking up the story of taking over Wolves.
There was a complicated arrangement involving Bellevue and Ipswich and Wolverhampton. And had that all gone seamlessly to plan, Wolverhampton would have ended up with Preben Eriksson and Dennis Sigalis out of the Ipswich team, and a £50,000 cash injection to Wolverhampton. And another promoter, there's no need to mention any names, gave me this £50,000, which was our sort of start-up capital. But the cheque bounced, and it never went through the bank, despite 3 or 4 different attempts. So the whole Wolverhampton venture was completely undercapitalised, right from the start. And we could perhaps have overcome that, I suppose, if the weather had been kind. But if you look back at the history of that first season at Monmouth Green, I think we had 11 or 12 rained-off meetings, something like that. So it ended up with a £100,000 loss, 50,000 of which, should never have been there, but I was badly let down by somebody else. So that was a difficult baptism, as you say, and the following season was no better. So we're looking at losses of £250,000 in 2 seasons, which in those days was a damn sight more than it would be today. And in the third year, we'd started to turn that around. It was a bit like turning an oil tanker around, but we were going the right way. And then my personal circumstances changed, and that brought everything, to a grinding halt.
And this is, long story short, but this is where Chris Van Stratton enters the picture, isn't it? And he gets
Well, Chris
involved.
has been helping me right from the start of that third year. He was helping me in the office and with the paperwork and with events, on the night. He was a huge help to me. But I had the difficult decision when I decided that it was going to have to, come to a halt. And I had to make the decision about whether I should sort of struggle on to the end of the year, which I could have done, and closed it then, or whether I should take the bolder decision to shut it, mid-season. And obviously I was agonising over which of these routes to go down for quite a few weeks. But I rather thought that if we soldiered on to the end of the season and then closed down, it would be very difficult then for somebody to, step in and resurrect it. Whereas if a track closes mid-season, the BSPA, as they were then, wouldn't want that, to happen. And there was a likelihood that, so that things could continue, someone would enter from stage left and pick up the reins. That was the gamble I took, and that was the route I took. And it was the right route, because, as you say, Chris and a small consortium of people stepped in after a 2 or 3 week sabbatical, and they took the club forward from there.
And then you yourself, you sort of had a bit of a brief break from Speedway yourself.
2 years.
As you say, you had your personal circumstances and you sort of stepped away, but then you came back, and this is the era where Sam Ermolenko is with the team now, and it's the start of a new era really from there on, and then eventually, fast forward a little bit to 1991, you win in league titles again.
Yeah. As you say, I had 2 years out, during which time I started my financial services career. And then out of the blue, I had a phone call one day from Chris, who said that he was looking for a team manager, for that next season, and how did I feel about that? And I was very keen, obviously, to come back. Lots of people didn't recognise me because I'd lost 5 stones in weight during those 2 years. But as you say, it all quickly dropped back into place. I think we were runners-up in my first season back, and then champions, the next time. And Chris and I have been very successful there. It was a very stable operation, always operating at the highest level of the game in England. Never, the remotest chance of it not, continuing year on year. So, as you say, it's sad enough, for the sport to have lost Wolverhampton, hopefully temporarily. But the fact that it's such a strong, well-run organisation is even harder to take.
If for whatever reason, Wolves can't find a way back, do you see that you would ever manage anywhere else?
Oh yeah.
Because I know that you've got 9 league titles. I'm sure that 10, is a number that
It's
you'd like to
always my ambition, as
Yeah.
people who know me will tell you, to have 10 individual world champions and 10 top flight league titles here in the UK. I'm one short of that, but as I've made abundantly clear, just to head off any speculation at the top of the pass, if you like, my allegiance is to Wolverhampton, and until and unless the day comes when that is no longer the remotest possibility, then I'll just be standing on the sidelines, watching and hoping.
You've talked about your achievements, with individual riders, with clubs, but you've never managed Great Britain or a national team. Has this come your way? You've been offered the chance,
Many times.
And so what's the thought process by not
doing
doing it?
I think that in years gone by, if you're promoting a speedway, as I was, and team managing speedway teams, that takes an awful lot of time. And I just felt, in the years that I was courted, that I just didn't have the time, that job needs. I know that donkeys years ago, Team GB have been successful in World Pairs events, World Team Cup events, but they were sort of rare occasions. And managing an English team in those days was a bit like an invitation to be disappointed, because, as I say, victory in those world events was very scarce. That's because, we didn't have the riding strength necessary. But for me, as I say, I didn't have the time. And now that Britain are becoming more successful on the world stage, that undoubtedly is as a result of the time and effort that people like Rob Painter are putting in. That's what it takes, But I never had the time to do that because of everything else I was involved with.
You do, after dinner speaking, you've done quite a few of those as well, haven't you, with this sort of material?
Yeah, I enjoy those. I've done quite a few of clubs' dinner and dances. I've done Edinburgh, I think, a couple of times. I did Glasgow one year. I did Stoke one year. I've done 20 or 30 at Wolves, of course. And I did the World Speedway Riders Association dinner 3 or 4 years ago, and I've done the referees get together. So, yeah, I enjoy that, and I tend to involve people who are in the audience. They're. I think they're good anyway. I'm keen to do more of them. In fact, Jeff Stelling's on this tour of the UK at the minute, talking about his life and times in the world of sport. And Ty Woffinden and I are thinking of doing half a dozen of them in the year coming up, from the length and breadth of the country. So we might involve somebody like Kelvin, who can be the master of ceremonies, and we can tell our tales, so look out for them.
Oh, that would be phenomenal. That would be phenomenal, wouldn't it? On the subject of Ty, and we touched on the Grand Prix stuff, but obviously he came to ride for Wolves, and I think one of the first episodes I did of this podcast a few years ago, we spoke to Neil Machin, and of course he gave Ty his very first professional ride on his 16th birthday. He's Ty's godfather, isn't he, godparent? And we talked about how he wanted to sort of get away from that because he didn't want people to see that he'd had sort of family help, if you like, and sort of go somewhere different. And Wolves was his choice, and then you've helped guide him there because he was a young, talented, but he hadn't actually won anything really at that point. And so you've helped, bring him through from a fresh talent to world class, well, 3-time world champion, but world class rider.
Yeah, CVS secured his signature as a 16-year-old, I think. So he was on Wolves books, but he was loaned out to Rye House, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But the days were coming when Ty had got to make his mind up about whether he wanted to step up, and if so, with who. So it fell to me to persuade him that Wolverhampton, was the place. And it's funny actually, Ian, because we met to thrash this out at this very venue.
Oh, really? Right here?
That room, just in there.
Yeah.
And Ty turned up with his mom and dad and his mechanic, Johnny Burks. He sat in the van on the car park here, and I sat down with Ty and his mom and dad and explained to him why he should ride for Wolverhampton, but more particularly what I could, do for him if he did. And I haven't seen him ride very much, but I knew what I was looking at. And I promised his dad that if you give me the opportunity, I will take him to the very top of the game. And we were running a meeting at Wolverhampton that night. We met here in the afternoon, but we were racing at Monmouth that night. And Ty was in the meeting. It was the Olympic, in fact, the very last meeting of our season. And we left here, having heard everybody's, input. And they got in the van and I got in my car and we drove up to Monmouth Green. And I got out of my car and Ty's dad got out of their van and came over to the car. He said, "We've listened to what you've had to say." He said, "And we've just been having a natter in the van and Ty's decided he wants to ride for you." So, that's how we came to put that in place. And, I'm delighted to say, obviously, that I delivered on my promise to his dad. It's a long time now, 11 years since his first world title, 2013. But I firmly believe there's more titles in him. It's just a matter of getting them out, And in recent years, there's always been something, blocking the path. But now that he's resettled back in the UK, riding in the UK again, I think that those building blocks are back in place, and I'm expecting a very big season from Ty.
And what do you look for in a young rider? How do you spot? If you turn up to an event and you've said that you've been to these youth events wherever they are in the world, and you look at a rider and you see he's got it. What sort of thing is it that stands out?
Good equipment, obviously, well presented. But the key thing with any young rider is they've got to be going fast. It don't matter if they're out of control, because that will come with time. But you've got to have the speed. Do you remember a rider called Gary Guglielmi?
I do, vaguely, yeah.
I think on my second or third year at Coventry, all those years ago, we had Mitch Shearer in the team, and Gary was a mate of Mitch's. And Mitch says, "You ought to have a look at this Guglielmi guy, he's really good." So we brought him over from Australia, and he was going around Brandon, but he was a total lunatic, I've never seen anybody so out of control in all my life. But he was fast, very fast. And that's what I've always looked for in riders, because Guglielmi went on, you would have seen him practicing at Coventry. You would never have imagined him being a rider, ever. But he went on to be Coventry's number one, never mind, can't ride at all. And it's because, practice and experience brings the control. But if you haven't got the speed, you're wasting your time. I could reel off tons of riders who are copybook stylists, but they ain't fast enough, The sport's littered with riders like that. But the ones that make it to the very top are the ones that usually would have been out of control in their youth.
That 10th league title so far, at least, has evaded you, but you've been very close and getting to the playoffs with Wolves over the years. It's, as you say, there's quite a lot of luck involved in Speedway as well, isn't there? Everything's got to fall your way. How do you reflect on the last year or two with Wolves up to the point where we are now?
Well, we've been close, as you say, if you class getting to the playoffs as close. But when it comes to the playoffs themselves, it either happens or it doesn't. You can prepare the team, as well as you want. But if they don't, or some of them don't deliver what you expect on the day, then it ain't going to happen. And I think last year in particular, I think the writing was on the wall for Wolves as the season went along, because we had a lot of very close scrapes at Monmouth. A lot of last eight deciders, a lot of draws, superheats, all this kind of stuff. So, it would be remiss of me to say that I didn't expect us, to go through in the playoffs, because I certainly did. But, the bottom line is we weren't in good enough form when it mattered. And if you're not, it ain't going to happen.
And then now, looking forward to the future, and it's just hoping that you can get Wolves back in action once again between, yourselves and CVS and the various, councils and governing bodies and whoever's involved.
Yeah, it's we need, a plot of land, don't we? As I say, Wolverhampton Council seem to have drawn a blank on that front, but we're surrounded by half a dozen other councils here. So obviously we wouldn't want to be too far away from our spiritual home, but other local authorities now are actively seeking, parcels of land that could be developed. So we wait on them reporting back to us.
And hopefully there will be good news about Coventry. We've already seen it with Oxford, though, that, it can be done. Workington being another example of a club that found themselves with nowhere at very short notice, and they've come back. So it's that must give you faith that it is possible.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference in Wolverhampton's case, because these other places seem to be closing for, housing development, that kind of stuff. There isn't any suggestion that that's the reason, that Wolverhampton have been removed from Monmouth Green. That's just a business decision at the minute. Now, whether that develops into something more akin to what's happening at Coventry, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds for Monmouth Green. But for the moment, those doors are closed to us, and we await developments.
Well, all the very best, and we hope to see you back in charge of a team again. Obviously, Wolves at some point sooner than later. But
no problem. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming here, and I'm sure we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, we'll do part 2 sometime soon.
Thank you. It was a lovely chat, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed having the chat. And I must say, big thanks to Ryan Guest for helping sort this one out, and also to Pete's son, Chris Adams, who of course is going to be taking charge of the Birmingham Brummies, but he also gave us a little bit of background info as well. So thanks to you, and maybe we will pick up the conversation and hone in on a couple of those areas that really Pete felt that there was too much to go at in such a short time, and maybe go deeper into what's required of a team manager, and also what's required to take a good rider and make them a great one as well. So maybe we'll cover that soon over the course of the summer. Maybe that could be a task. Thanks for listening. Check out some of the previous episodes. Recently we had one of Ollie's sparring partners, Ole Olsen. Hans Nielsen was a recent guest, talking about their little feud which took place. That's an interesting story if you've not heard it yet. Also we spoke with Ben Cook, Brady Kurtz. We also recently spoke with Craig Ackroyd, who's the FIM referee, Alan Rossiter, Many, many more episodes to go at as well. So fill the time between now and the start of the Speedway season, and we'll be back with another episode very soon. Our next guest will be Charles Wright, who's gearing up for his testimonial year in 2024. So look out for that one soon on the next episode of Humans of Speedway.
Social Podcast Network.
On their first day in office, with a country in crisis, President Biden and Vice President Harris got to work for us, cutting black child poverty in half, delivering more money to black entrepreneurs, and creating millions of new good-paying jobs. They've lowered health insurance premiums and made prescription drugs more affordable. And they capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 per month. Because we all deserve a fair shot to get ahead. And they're making sure our voices are heard by putting South Carolina first in this year's Democratic primary election. Show President Biden and Vice President Harris your support in the Democratic primary election. You can vote early in person from January 22nd to February 2nd, or you can vote on Election Day on Saturday, February 3rd. Early voting is closed on Sunday, January 28th.
I'm Joe Biden, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Biden for President.